many of you, it might be tempting for me to say that I'm already very familiar with your concerns. I know what you're concerned about: trade, infrastructure, regulations. This time around, it's a little bit different since the last time we met. We're currently weathering an economic storm with record inflation on goods, transportation, virtually everything you need to do business. And that's certainly new since the last time we held this meeting in 2020. Today, I hope to learn how we as the Steel Caucus leadership can continue to be your advocates in Congress and to make sure the administration knows exactly what your perspective is and how you can remain competitive here in America and on the international stage. I'm thrilled to represent so many of your companies and your employees in the 1st District of Arkansas, including the soon-to-be largest steel-producing county in the nation. We appreciate you being here today. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Vice Chair Crawford. At this time, I recognize myself. I also am going to submit my remarks and keep it to the point so we can hear from yourself. But ultimately, I represent Gary, Indiana, the top-producing steel region in the nation. And today is all about making sure those hundreds of thousands of jobs and the economic development that you provide, along with the national security and interest of national security when it comes to the steel industry. So we do have an infrastructure bill, a bipartisan infrastructure bill, where Washington needs to get those dollars into the communities so that you could start producing steel in order to fulfill those orders. We also need to make sure that we are doing everything we can to have a bipartisan Competes Act pass. And as far as a national security issue, making sure that the semiconductors and the chips are being made in the United States that allows for the auto industry, the appliance industry, the defense industry to be able to be productive. And so we will continue to advocate for that. And as a member of Congress on my 3rd day, my predecessor, Congressman Stauber, who had dedicated himself to the steel industry and to the United Steelworkers, allowed me and gave me the opportunity through his leadership to be a co-chair of this caucus. And since then, we made sure that we worked in a bipartisan effort to bring a Section 232 to fight for the administration to keep that in place to protect the steel industry, and 301 and those tariffs to protect us from overcapacity in governments that dump steel and lower the market value. And so we'll continue to fight for that. And as a member of Congress, I've testified in front of the International Trade Commission 5 times to make sure that we have strong trade deals and to make sure that the International Trade Commission has the resources necessary to be able to provide those protections. So trade and allowing for economic development and investment over the last 2 years in the steel industries are very important. So what we do today is important because we're bringing together labor, government, and industry in order to be able to provide results. So ultimately, I'm very thankful that you've made this time, and I am, my priority is to leave here today knowing what the future of steel will be and what your perspective on that will be, and all of us collectively in a bipartisan effort making sure that we are tackling those issues to provide for families. And in closing, my grandfather came over from Czechoslovakia, worked at Inland Steel, that was then ArcelorMittal, which is now Cleveland Cliffs, for 53 years. In my community, in my district, steel touches hundreds of thousands of lives. And so I have a friend here, Danny Franovich, who owns a downstream industry. It's called Crown ERAM, and he provides power services and electrical services for mills. But he provides work for 53 families, and he invested his life fortune into that company. And I also was able to, when Tom Conway and I kicked off the infrastructure bill for the steelworkers to make sure that people were rallying behind it, we knew the importance of it, I was able to high-five a 10-year-old girl who was a daughter of a steelworker. Her name was Stormy, who wanted to be a steelworker. So it's about those future jobs also. So today, let's be focused on making sure we come together when it's government, labor, and industry and providing for a future for those families. So I thank you very much. At this time, I'd like to recognize Conor Lamb for opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Mervan. I'm just going to waive the majority of the opening. We're here to hear from the witnesses primarily, but let me just say welcome back. It's really nice to see you all in person. I know it's been a little while since we've been able to do that this way, and I'll look forward to the question and answers. Thank you.
And with that, I would like to thank you, Co-Chair Conor Lamb, Congressman Lamb. I'd like to represent President Tom Conway. Thomas Conway was elected to the International Executive Board to succeed retiring International President Leo Gerard as leader of the United Steelworkers, the largest industrial union in North America, effectively July 15th, 2019, and was reelected to a full term in 2021. Mr. Conway grew up in a union family in New Jersey. His father was an active member in the International Union of Operating Engineers. His mother worked in a brush factory where she successfully organized a union and negotiated labor contracts. After serving 4 years in the United States Air Force and attending trade school for the airframe and power plant mechanics, Mr. Conway was recruited by Bethlehem Steel in 1978 to work at its Burns Harbor Works along Lake Michigan in northwest Indiana. He joined the local 6787 of the USW, which is in my district, and quickly became a union activist. He has since testified numerous times before Congress, the International Trade Commission, and the Steel Caucus, and has become the union's most experienced contractor negotiator. It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Conway to the Steel Caucus again. Mr. Conway.
Thank you, Congressman Rebar. I didn't know you guys had that bio. Greetings, Chairman Lamb, Rebar, Boston, Crawford. And I want to thank you for your continued stewardship of one of the most influential caucuses in Congress. It's an honor to speak with you this morning. I've been a steel worker for nearly 44 years now, starting out making steel in northwest Indiana, and since working to help ensure our members can safely produce millions of tons of steel every year with good wages and good benefits. And that's why I can say with confidence that through the fair bargaining process with many of the people beside me here at this table, we're going to be able to reach good collective bargaining agreements by September 1st. The reason we can approach this bargaining session with an eye towards cooperation and not a confrontation are many, but Washington, D.C. has played a role. And we want to continue that cooperation between labor and management, and it's important that Congress and our government take a leadership over its responsibility ensuring fair competition. And although our country and the world's economy are being stressed in really significant ways, the fundamentals of the domestic steel industry are strong because of cooperation between industry, government, and labor. For example, the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law will add 40 to 50 million tons of steel demand over the course of the next 5 years, and Congress's addition of the Build America, Buy America, or BABA provisions require that all federally financed infrastructure projects use American-made iron and steel. We see immense possibility through increasing domestic iron and steel procurement. For example, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, just one account at HUD, spends over $400 million annually on clean water and drinking water and materials such as pipe and sewer pipe. 2 other agencies already ensure U.S. workers get a first shot at making those materials. So it's time to harmonize our procurement rules using BABA to maximize domestic jobs. We also need to expand clean technology manufacturing to create opportunity and demand for steel products, whether it's in a windmill or an EV charging station or everything else in between. Steel will be needed. At the same time, the path forward to reducing emissions means respecting the importance of the current productive capacity and incentivize the deployment of new technologies and techniques in steelmaking to keep us cleaner than our global competition. At the same time, we cannot let our guard down in international trade. The steel and aluminum 232s and the 301 tariffs on China, when combined with effective dumping and countervailing duty laws, have proven effective at keeping global excess steel capacity at bay. Yet the globe is still awash in excess capacity to the tune of over 500 million tons. We need long-term solutions. That's why I'm encouraged by the global arrangement on steel and aluminum between the U.S. and the European Union. These negotiations have the possibility of creating a larger bloc to restrict excess of dirty steel, and Congress should do everything it can to support that success. Congress also needs to update our trade laws. We haven't updated our trade laws that protect Americans' jobs in 7 years. Foreign governments and importers have gotten creative in evading U.S. duties. That's why the USW is supportive of Representative Sewell and Johnson's bipartisan Level the Playing Field Act 2.0 and encourage every member of the Steel Caucus to co-sponsor that legislation. This is important in over 90 million tons of new integrated capacity, much of it funded by Chinese producers, will come online and explode carbon emissions by over 3 times in Southeast Asia. This is why the Steel Caucus should pay close attention to the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework that the administration is currently negotiating. USW is not going to settle for anything less than a good agreement and encourages Congress to push for strong pro-worker framework. Finally, the workers of the sectors need strong safety net too. Workers in import-sensitive industries like steel have benefited from robust job training programs like TAA. The program is set to expire in September, and it would be a failure of Congress to let a program where over 100,000 workers qualified last year, and most of whom worked in manufacturing. Global and domestic events have made America's future uncertain. Our union sees a pathway through that uncertainty by everyone here looking to each other in the eye and agreeing to a fair bargain. Labor and management do it every contract. I encourage Congress to work with us and do the same. And thank you, and I look forward to any questions.
Thank you, President Conway. At this time, I'd like to recognize Representative Lamb to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you. I'm now pleased to introduce Mr. Lorenzo Gonsalves. Mr. Gonsalves has been Chairman, President, and CEO of Cleveland Cliffs since August 2014. He designed and led the company through a strategic transformation, including its acquisitions of AK Steel and ArcelorMittal USA. Mr. Gonsalves has been in the industry for many years, has testified at this hearing many times. He's previously been chairman of the board, president and CEO of Metals USA Holdings, president and CEO of California Steel Industries. He's won several awards, earned a Master of Science degree from the Federal University in Belo Horizonte, Brazil, and a bachelor's degree in metallurgical engineering from the Military Institute of Engineering in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. I also have to say, Cliffs had several of us up to its Butler location sometime last year for what I think is one of the most interesting presentations I've received as a member of Congress, really just about what grain-oriented electrical steel actually is and how it works and why it's so important to so many of the things that we do. So I don't think I've seen you since then, but I just wanted to thank you for making that available to us because your folks really did a tremendous job. And with that, we welcome you back to the steel hearing.
Good morning, Co-Vice Chairman Boston Crawford. Good morning, all other members of the Steel Caucus. I'm very pleased to be here representing the 27,000 employees of Cleveland Cliffs. We acquired all these companies that you mentioned, Chairman Lamb, and different from what normally happens, instead of shrinking down and reducing employment, we have grown by leaps and bounds. We increased our workforce by more than 5,000 people since the acquisitions took place. I last testified before this caucus in March of 2020, just days before the start of COVID lockdowns. Since that time, we have acquired 2 steel companies, AK Steel and ArcelorMittal USA, and a major processor of scrap metal named Ferrous Processing and Trading Company. We also complete the construction of a state-of-the-art direct reduction plant, the first of its kind in the Midwest of the United States. That's a $1 billion investment in Toledo, Ohio, concluded in December of 2020. With these investments, Cleveland Cliffs has transformed itself from a pure-play iron ore mining company into the largest producer of flat-rolled steel in North America and the largest supplier of steel for the automotive industry. I'll add one point, and the largest supplier of steel of each car manufacturer that is now moving from internal combustion engines to electric vehicles. each one of them. We are the largest supplier. With these investments, Cleveland-Cliffs has transformed itself from this type of a major supplier of automotive steel. We provide employment for approximately 27,000 people, with over 20,000 employees represented by unions, including the United Steelworkers, the United Auto Workers, and the International Association of Machinists. Rather than deliver the same speech you have heard time and time again about the need of a level playing field and other tired references, I'm going to address a few key points that relate to the future of the domestic steel industry and how our success can influence the Midwest and the American society as a whole. First, we have right now a real opportunity to reverse the misguided 30-plus-year-old failure called globalization. And we can only do that by rebuilding the American manufacturing sector. Over the past 2 years, the United States has experienced two painful lessons in over-reliance on other countries: the COVID pandemic and Russia's war in Ukraine. The pandemic resulted in the realization by the broader society that the United States has outsourced to China and to other nations the production of goods and materials needed for the health of our people and the basic functioning of our economy. Backlogged ports, trucking shortages, and customs delays were not the cause of supply chain problems, but rather symptoms of the relentless and systematic outsourcing of American manufacturing. The second lesson came with Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the grim realization that a conventional shooting war between global superpowers is a never-present threat. The promise that unrestrained free trade would lead to a lasting global peace is a farce. The invasion was undeniable evidence of the strategic realignment of the world, with the United States and its allies on the side of democratic values, and with Russia and China using unbridled aggression to grow territory, suppress dissent, and commit human rights abuses. The underlying truth is simple. China and Russia want to stake claim to America's global influence. They are not our trading partners or consumer markets to be tapped by American companies. They are, first and foremost, superpowers competing against the United States. If the United States is to continue to serve as the world's most influential leader, we must reclaim control of our manufacturing base. Said another way, giving up our manufacturing base, as we have been doing for more than 30 years now, is equivalent to yielding power to our enemies. In the wake of the hard lessons learned in the last 2 years, a number of companies are finally considering making investments in domestic manufacturing facilities and growing good-paying U.S. jobs. As the American vehicle fleet electrifies, we have a unique opportunity to build the entire EV supply chain in the United States. Cleveland-Cliffs, as the largest supplier of automotive steel in North America, is on the cutting edge of developing and supplying steel products for this electrification, such as advanced high-strength steels for battery enclosures and non-oriented electrical steels for electric motors. For this electrification revolution to succeed, however, we have urgent need to reshore production of microchips and many other manufacturing components. I implore Congress to pass the CHIPS Act now. That's a good start. Next, I need to reemphasize that the United States has the most technologically advanced, carbon-efficient steel industry on the planet. Europe likes to pretend that its steel industry is more advanced than the American steel industry. It is not. In fact, Europe finds itself in an impossible situation, having to rely on natural gas from Russia to support manufacturing and basic needs such as home heating. The United States has abundant natural gas, that's being employed as a lower carbon fuel source to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Europe talks about hydrogen and carbon-free steelmaking, but that is just rhetoric. With what we already have in place, and with no need to further investment or massive subsidies, the United States is poised to lead the world in clean steel production for the next century. Finally, it's time for the United States, in particularly the traditional steelmaking region of the American Midwest, to realize what we have: a skilled workforce, raw materials, fresh water, and technology. We have the means of producing steel and the very best consumer market on the planet. The United States is suffering an identity crisis at present, beset by divisive politics and fatigue from the events of the past 2 years. But fundamentally, the United States is still a great country, one that rewards hard work and values community over ideology or partisan affiliation. The power to bring back what is good in America does not reside on Wall Street and will not come with the last pre-packed idea from abroad. I ask that you, as our elected officials, reflect the goodwill and common sense is still present in our communities and our people, the same ones that elect you. Manufacturing in the United States is necessary for good-paying jobs, capitalism, and a peaceful society. That's all we need to reclaim our glory and to continue to be the envy of the world. Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Conclaves. I just want to let you know that Conor Lamb and Representative Lamb and I had that conversation on the floor after he had that tour, and he was able to enlighten me, and he was thrilled and learning the new technology that was that you were placing with the electrical vehicles and electrified steel. So we did have that conversation. Thank you very much. At this time, I'd like to recognize Representative Crawford to introduce Mr. Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Al Bear is Executive Vice President for Plate and Structural Products at Nucor Corporation. He's held multiple positions at Nucor, including General Manager of Nucor Steel Texas and Vice President of Nucor Corporation. Mr. Bear, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Chairman Mervan and Lamb, Vice Chairman Crawford and Bost, on behalf of Nucor Corporation's more than 31,000 teammates, thank you for the opportunity to speak today about the investments we're making in American steel. My name's Al Bear, and I'm Executive Vice President of Plate and Structural Products for Nucor Corporation. For decades, this caucus has been the first line of defense in keeping our trade laws strong and helping to get foreign governments out of the steel business. We must all continue to fight for a global steel market where winners are determined by market forces, not by government subsidies or other non-economic factors. Because of your hard work and diligence, the playing field is more level today for our industry, which has led to billions of dollars of new investments and thousands of new jobs. At Nucor, we're seizing this opportunity by investing more than $12 billion to expand our steelmaking capabilities and target new growth areas for steel demand. By the end of this year, we'll begin operating our steel mill in Brandenburg, Kentucky, which will produce plate steel for offshore wind towers and other infrastructure projects. This market is currently served by foreign steel. We'll also soon break ground on a new steel sheet mill in Mason County, West Virginia. This will be one of the most technologically advanced and have one of the lowest carbon footprints of any sheet mill in the world. And we recently announced a new rebar micro mill in Lexington, North Carolina, which will serve construction customers from Washington, D.C. to Atlanta. These projects will create thousands of family-supporting jobs and enable our next generation of manufacturing workers to have a promising future in their home communities. As customers look to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in their supply chains, the low-emission steel produced by the U.S. industry gives us a competitive advantage. By pioneering the use of recycling to make new steel, Nucor has led the way as one of the cleanest steel makers in the world. Our greenhouse gas intensity is less than 1/4 of the global average and 1/5 of the average blast furnace producer. This puts us 20 years ahead of the Paris Agreement's most aggressive benchmark for the global steel sector. And even though we're one of the cleanest steelmakers in the world, we are actively investing to reduce our carbon footprint even further. Finally, the pandemic has taught us that developing strong, resilient domestic supply chains for critical materials like semiconductors is vital. Reshoring semiconductor production presents tremendous potential for unleashing a manufacturing renaissance in the United States. We are encouraged by the increased focus Congress and the administration have given to this critical issue and to our country's broader competitiveness with China. As legislation advances, we must also use this opportunity to address the Chinese government's latest schemes to evade our trade laws, as Representatives Sewell and Johnson have proposed in Leveling the Playing Field Act 2.0. We are confident Congress will get this important bipartisan priority across the finish line. Last week, Nucor reached the 50-year milestone of being listed on the New York Stock Exchange and will celebrate by ringing the closing bell on Tuesday. In the last 50 years, while total domestic steel production in the U.S. has decreased by almost 30%, Nucor has grown from a company that produced only 138,000 tons of recycled steel at one small bar mill in Darlington, South Carolina, to become the industry leader producing over 25 million tons of bar, sheet, plate, and structural steel for our economy at 25 mills across the country. We appreciate the steadfast support and leadership from all of you in this caucus. Thank you for the partnership you've built with our industry. The work you are doing is truly making a difference. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to recognize Representative Bost, and we'll introduce Mr. Farhoff from U.S. Steel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'd like to introduce Mr. Richard Fruhoff. He's the Chief Strategy and Sustainability Officer at U.S. Steel. Mr. Fruhoff assumed this role last year after many years of serving in senior executive roles with the company. In his current position, he is responsible for creating and driving U.S. Steel's strategy and sustainability priorities to achieve profitable growth. He also is in charge of developing policies and methods that will support U.S. Steel's future by aligning business sustainability and organization opportunities. Earlier in his career, he served in national security positions with the U.S. Department of State, U.S. Armed Control and Disarmament Agency, and the Department of the Navy. As a Marine, I won't hold that against him. A native of Pittsburgh, Mr. Fruhoff earned a bachelor's degree of science in foreign service from Georgetown University, a master's of public policy degree in Harvard University Kennedy School of Government, and his law degree from University of Virginia School of Law. Mr. Fruhoff, thank you for appearing here today, and you may deliver your testimony. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and all the vice chairs and the members of the Congressional Steel Caucus. On behalf of the 24,000 men and women of United States Steel, thank you for the opportunity to join you today for this hearing. All of us appreciate the bipartisan caucus's leadership and support of American steelmaking. You know, a trendy phrase these days is reshoring of American manufacturing. Well, I think I can speak for everybody at this table. We don't have to reshore. We never left. From our iron ore mines in northern Minnesota to our integrated iron and steelmaking operations in Gary, Indiana, the Mon Valley near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Granite City Works near St. Louis, to our electric arc furnaces in Fairfield, Alabama, and Osceola, Arkansas, we mine, melt, and make steel in the USA, and we're proud to do it. Steel is critical to our national and economic security and is critical to providing a foundation for domestic manufacturing and energy security. The pandemic and the economic recovery have emphasized the critical importance of retaining and rebuilding domestic supply chains. We need American-made steel to rebuild and supply American-made manufacturing and energy independence. Global steel overcapacity and the actions of foreign governments and producers that feed that overcapacity are a real threat to our security. This excess steelmaking in China and other countries distorts global steel trades. Our U.S. industry is investing to grow stronger, to create jobs, and to continue to meet our nation's needs. We cannot allow this to be undermined by overcapacity and unfairly traded imports. Strong trade enforcement and continuation of the Section 232 National Security Action on Steel Imports is absolutely vital to American security. We thank the caucus for their strong support of the industry's AD/CVD cases and confronting unfair trade. Since I last appeared here in March of 2020, U.S. Steel has advanced the sustainability commitments in our Best for All strategy, which is making it possible for us to get to our future faster. In January of this year, we announced that our approximately $3 billion next generation, highly sustainable and technologically advanced steel mill will be located in Arkansas, in Osceola, close to our cutting-edge Big River Steel plant. This new mill design features 2 electric arc furnaces with advanced steel-making capability, a state-of-the-art endless casting and rolling line, and advanced finishing capabilities. The first use of endless casting and rolling technology in the United States brings significant energy, efficiency, and capability enhancements to the company's operations. When completed, the sophisticated new steelmaking facility, in combination with Big River Steel, will form a 6.3 million ton mega mill, capable of providing many of the most advanced and sustainable steels in North America. The new non-grain-oriented electrical steel and Galvalume galvanizing lines currently under construction at Big River Steel will further advance our ability to respond to our customers' pressing supply chain needs to satisfy their own domestic manufacturing expansion. Non-grain-oriented electrical steel is a critical product for electric vehicle motors. This new line will help our automaker customers address their increasing demand for electrical steels as our economy adjusts to climate change. In April, U.S. Steel was recognized for another significant sustainability achievement. We earned the first ever site certification in North America from Responsible Steel, which is an international nonprofit organization with multi-stakeholder membership from every part of the steel supply chain. That's customers and manufacturers and non-governmental organizations. The site certification was awarded to Big River Steel, which will hold the first global annual meeting of Responsible Steel in the United States in November. In May, we celebrated our investment with you, Congressman Mervan, of $60 million in a 500,000-ton pig caster at our Gary Works, which is under active construction. This project is a key part of our metallic strategy to utilize Minnesota mined ore to support electric arc furnace steel production. As is U.S. Steel's announcement last month of plans to break ground this year at one of our 2 Minnesota mines on a DR-grade iron ore pellet production system. This approximately $150 million investment would produce pellets that are critical for DRI or HBI process for electric arc furnace steelmaking. As the United States transitions to a lower carbon steelmaking, we need to develop iron ore production facilities to ensure we're sourcing American iron to make American steel. We should not and do not need to source pig iron or other iron products from Russia. In fact, we urge the President to use his new authority to adjust tariff rates on Russian pig iron by levying at least a 25% tariff on those imports. We also at U.S. Steel are the first American headquartered steelmaker to publicly announce a 2050 net carbon zero emissions goal. We are in a global race to decarbonize steelmaking. Developing and deploying needed technologies requires collaboration, yet it's also a matter of competitiveness. In Canada and across Europe, governments are quickly stepping forward to support and fund the multi-billion-dollar leap needed to advance and achieve steel decarbonization in their own industries. The U.S. begins the race ahead. The American industry has the lowest CO2 emissions per ton of steel produced among the 7 largest steelmaking countries. Yet we must accelerate as other countries, including our allies, fully commit to investing in 100% green steel production. As just one example, the Hydrogen Hub initiative, enacted in the bipartisan infrastructure law, can provide critical support for decarbonizing our economy and industry. In southwestern Pennsylvania, U.S. Steel is actively exploring ways with like-minded organizations like Shell, GE Power, Equinor, EQT, and others to work together to advance that region as a hydrogen hub and national leader in decarbonization. Thank you again for inviting U.S. Steel to participate in the hearing, and I look forward to today's discussion.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to introduce Mr. Porter. Tracy Porter is the Executive Vice President of the Commercial Metals Company. During his tenure with CMC, he has served in numerous roles. Tracy began his career with CMC while in college. During that period, he worked in various capacities in the departments at the Seguin, Texas mill. After graduation, Tracy worked for General Portland Incorporated and Tedco, Inc. before rejoining CMC in January of 1991. He was named to his current position in November of 2021. Tracy has been involved in numerous local and statewide civic organizations as well as industry groups throughout his career. He recently served as chairman of the board of directors of the Steel Manufacturing Association, the Washington, D.C.-based Electric Arc Furnace Steel Industry Trade Association. It is my pleasure to recognize Mr. Porter for his statements.
Thank you. Co-Chairman Mervan, Lamb, Crawford, and Boss, thank you for the opportunity to address the Congressional Steel Caucus this morning. I appreciate your support of the U.S. steel industry and the U.S. industrial manufacturing base. I am Tracy Porter, Executive Vice President of Commercial Metals Company and past chairman of the Steel Manufacturers Associations. It's an honor to appear here today before you all and provide our perspectives on the American steel industry and our priorities on policy. Founded in 1915, CMC is a global leader in sustainable recycling, manufacturing, and fabrication of steel and metal products, excuse me, and is a leading provider of construction reinforcement solutions. Excuse me. CMC is a Fortune 500 company with over 12,000 employees globally, with our over $8.5 billion in sales in the last 12 months. CMC is reinvesting in American manufacturing with new steel mill operations in Arizona and recently announced steel mill to be located in the eastern United States. Since melting our first heat of steel in 1962, we have manufactured steel using 100% recycled metal and electric arc furnace technology, which is far more efficient and environmentally friendly than traditional blast furnace technology, using 82% less energy than the industry average and producing 63% less CO2 per ton of steel we melt. This process allows us to give new life to the scrap metal we collect at our recycling facilities, saving over 19 billion pounds of scrap from going to the landfills. We are among the lowest carbon intensity and most energy efficient steelmakers in the world. CMC is making record investments that are creating jobs, expanding product offerings, and building the futures of communities. In fact, American steel companies have announced some of the largest capital investments ever in states and counties across this country. Domestic steelmakers continue to make investments that will modernize, decarbonize, and electrify the American steel industry. Currently under construction in Mesa, Arizona, our third micro mill, will have the ability to direct connect renewable energy sources and will be the first in the world capable of producing both rebar, or reinforcing steel, and merchant bar. Located adjacent to our existing CMC Steel Arizona facility, which was the first successfully operated micro mill in the world, our new mill is currently scheduled to commission in early 2023. We also recently announced plans to build a fourth micro mill in the eastern U.S. Micromills are the most efficient and green steelmaking process available in the world today, and these investments will enable CMC to produce 1/3 of our steel in North America in micromills, which again use 26% less energy compared to traditional mini mills and generate 40% less greenhouse gas. I'd also like to add that CMC has an extensive steel operation in Poland. Given continuing hostilities and ongoing devastation, the number of refugees from Ukraine has grown to over 3.5 million people, which is equal to about 10% of the Polish population today. I'm extremely proud of the efforts of our CMC team in Poland to assist those in need. CMC continues to collaborate with well-known humanitarian aid groups that specialize in helping victims of armed conflicts and natural disasters, and has also made CMC accommodations available to refugees. I'd like to highlight three important topics during my time with you today: infrastructure investment, trade policy, and sustainable steelmaking. Our country depends on a vast network of critical infrastructure: airports, roads, bridges, freight, rail, ports, and electric grids to keep our economy humming. The age of many infrastructure systems, strains on supply chains, as well as rising maintenance and safety costs, are inhibiting our nation's economic performance. We applaud the bipartisan passage of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. This $1.2 trillion package is focused on traditional steel-intensive projects that will make our economy more competitive. The package is expected to increase rebar demand by 1.5 million tons and result in about a 17% increase in rebar consumption domestically. However, this positive development can only happen if we have strong domestic procurement preferences and strong trade law measures. If we genuinely want to have a stronger economy, a more competitive steel industry, and improve the environment, we must ensure that we build our nation's infrastructure with steel that's made by Americans for Americans. We must be committed to strong domestic procurement preferences in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, This will have a dual benefit of creating good-paying jobs and ensuring that we build back better using the cleanest, greenest steel available. The Section 232 response, though not originally designed to offset the impact of unfair trade, provided a comprehensive response in pursuit of distinct national security concerns, as well as stemming the flood of excessive global steel supply into the U.S. In combination with targeted AD and CVD orders, the 232 measures have helped to restore balance to the U.S. market and to create the conditions necessary for the industry to begin recovering and reinvesting. It is our opinion that after successful negotiation of tariff rate quotas with the EU, Japan, and the United Kingdom, the remaining 232 tariffs, as well as the quotas with Argentina, Brazil, and South Korea, remain intact. The 232 tariffs have resulted in a decrease of unfairly traded steel imports, increased capacity utilization, and spurred billions of dollars in investment announcements with minimal disruption to the domestic steel industry supply chain. In terms of China, we also realize that they are still engaging in market-distorting practices. Reduced demand, COVID-related lockdowns, and falling prices will cause Chinese producers to seek outlets for their subsidized excess capacity. The current 301 tariffs continue to be an important deterrent to Chinese non-market behavior. Increasingly, the EU and Canada are using subsidies to make their steel industries look more like ours. Imitation is not innovation. Subsidies to convert inefficient EU and Canadian steelmaking operations to existing EAF technology pioneered by American steelmakers has the potential to disrupt markets and add to global excess steel capacity. Over the last 3 years, the American steel producers have spent over $20 billion of their own money to make our industry more sustainable and more efficient. Sustainable steelmaking comes naturally to CMC. We have been in the metals recycling business for over 100 years. The United States is already a leader in sustainable steel production. In the U.S., over 70% of steel is produced with electric arc furnaces. According to the Climate Leadership Council, American-made steel products have over 75% less carbon intensity than internationally produced steel. We produce our steel in our country at CO2 levels that other countries can only aspire to, and we have been doing it for years. As there is increasing talk about carbon border adjustment, we must not penalize American steelmakers and other manufacturers for their superior low-carbon manufacturing processes and environmental stewardship. Congress should seriously consider some of the type of carbon border adjustment which ensures producers of dirty foreign steel, pay a premium to have the privilege of selling our markets. We should not tax our domestic producers. Burdensome regulations are already doing that. American steelmakers can't compete with anyone in the world. We lead the way in low carbon intensity steel production. We are an efficient industry that will continue to transcend every type of geopolitical and economic environment. With the support of sound government policies and free market principles, we are poised to safely and sustainably make steel that helps make our country secure and strong. I thank you for your attention and for your bipartisan leadership to support American steelmakers.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. At this time, I'd like to recognize Congressman Lamb for any questions that you may have.
Excuse me,
Yes.
we have one more witness.
I am so very sorry. Representative Crawford, please introduce the witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Anthony Froboda is our next speaker. He's currently the Vice President of Finance for Sekelman Industries and has served in various roles during his 31-year tenure with the company. Mr. Froboda is on the Board of Directors of the Committee on Pipe and Tube Imports and is the immediate past chairman. Mr. Froboda, thank you for being, and you're recognized.
Thank you for that. Good morning, Co-Chairman Lamb, Mervan, Co-Vice Chairman Boss, and Crawford, and the distinguished members of the Congressional Steel Caucus. My name is Tony Froboda, and I'm the Vice President of Finance and Government Relations at Sekelman Industries. I have served for over 3 decades. I'm also a second-generation steel employee. My father was a steel worker with Republic Steel and LTV, and have been affected by steel my entire life. Sekelman is the nation's largest producer of steel pipe and tube products. Headquartered in Chicago, we employ over 1,000 workers at our facilities in Alabama, Arizona, Arkansas, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. Our company has been in business for over 4 decades. and we have continued to expand our footprint by adding new product lines, investing in new facilities, and expanding opportunities for our employees. Just a few months ago, we opened up our newest facility at Jumbo HSS Mill, the largest in the world in Blytheville, Arkansas, in fact, in Representative Crawford's district. The $200 million project is one of the largest private investments made by the pipe and tube industry in the last decade. We're not the only ones investing on the pipe and tube side. Borasan, Bull Moose Tube, and Nucor has invested quite heavily in pipe and tube to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars in Texas, Kentucky, and other areas of the country. You've also heard from everybody else down the line here as far as their investments. We're talking about billions of dollars. This was all made possible by the 232 ruling. Infrastructure jobs, helping families in a difficult time, all this made possible by us supporting the steel industry the past few years. This morning, I'm pleased to appear on behalf of the Committee on Pipe and Tube Imports, the nation's leading trade association for the U.S. pipe and tube industry. CPTI members make an array of carbon and stainless steel pipe and tube fittings and products. CPTI members span the country. We are in 32 states, 99 congressional districts, and today employ over 32,000 employees. These companies manufacture a variety of carbon and stainless steel pipe, tube products used in our agricultural, automotive, construction, defense, energy, fire protection, and transportation sectors. The industry is an essential customer of the nation's steel industry. In fact, many of the companies who are on this panel today are suppliers of flat-rolled and long products to our industry. Despite the challenges of a lingering pandemic, I am here today to say that our industry is better positioned to serve our customers across this country. We can attribute this to having strong trade laws and have resulted in anti-dumping and countervailing duty orders on a variety of steel pipe and tube products and the Steel Section 232 program, both of which have worked to reduce the number of unfairly traded imports in the United States. The industry has been a supporter of trade laws and continues to support policies that will strengthen these tools. In addition, the industry firmly supports the continuation of this Section 232 program. The industry and its employees have remained committed to serving our customers, and companies are making the necessary investments to ensure we can continue to contribute to the nation's economic recovery. Companies have taken the necessary steps to reinvest, retool, and serve new and existing markets, including construction, energy, and infrastructure. As we move forward, we need to ensure that we are able to compete on a level playing field with our global competitors. In steel pipe and tube, we know firsthand the injurious effect of unfairly traded imports. Just 5 years ago, imports of pipe and tube were at a record high, and as a result of existing AD and CVD duties and Section 232 tariffs, we saw quotas drop in number of imports and number of products. This was welcome news. However, we knew it was only a matter of time before we saw imports increase. In 2020, there were 3.4 million tons of pipe and tube imports compared to 4.4 million tons in 2021. This reflected a 29% increase from the previous year, and import penetration rose from 27.2% in 2020 to 33.9% in 2021. We have data for Q1 of 2022 that reports import penetration at over 40%. On an equally important note, the industry remains committed to ensure that we can respond to any global trade irregularities. As we know, recent effects in Ukraine have decimated the country and their citizens. We are all aware of Russia's steelmaking capacity and their ability to downstream products, including pipe and tube. Our industry has learned that some Russian steel has been used to make pipe and tube, which has entered into the U.S. from Oman, a way for Russia to potentially evade existing AD and CVD duties on hot-rolled steel and possibly avoid trade sanctions that are in place. We also believe that UAE producers are using Russian steel. We shared this information and conveyed our concerns to the Commerce Department and U.S. Customs and Border Patrol that false, melted, and poured source information was listed for nearly 50,000 tons of pipe in 2022, even though there is zero hot-rolled steel production in the UAE. The Steel Caucus should look into the lax enforcement of these existing licensing provisions and blatant violations by providing false information on entry documents. We hope that the caucus will inquire with Commerce Customs as to why this is occurring and what action plans they take to remedy the problem. It is disturbing to see that Russia may be economically benefiting by shipping steel products to third countries, evading all the steps taken by the United States. We would ask that the caucus engage with the administration to discuss what appropriate actions can be made in this matter. As Congressional Steel Caucus continues its work in the second session of the 117th Congress, we would like to highlight a few of our priorities. The industry is continuing to carefully monitor the USMCA to ensure full implementation and the attendant benefits are received by U.S. manufacturers. Canada has been adhering to that agreement, but Mexico is of great concern. The industry continues to work with USTR to identify solutions through Section 232 provisions to remedy the growing levels of misclassified steel conduit products from Mexico. The industry remains committed to ending global steel overcapacity, particularly in China, and will continue to engage with the OECD Steel Committee and global steel partners on solutions. The CPTI is a strong supporter of trade laws, and we remain committed to work with Congress and the administration to develop and advance legislation that will provide tools to unfair trade practices and custom fraud. As Congress moves forward with their legislative agenda, the CPTI asks the caucus to support these measures, and we believe to reinforce the foundation of the domestic steel sector. Support pending trade legislation, Leveling the Playing Field Act 2.0 HR, which is currently being discussed in the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act. We ask the caucus to convey to conferees that it's important to include the trade remedy, the provisions in the final agreement. Having these in place will enhance U.S. trade laws to ensure import-sensitive sectors, including the steel sector and their workers, can obtain relief through enforceable remedies. Support legislation that would create opportunities for the domestic steel sector to serve the growing renewable energy sector through the use of tax credits in the Budget Reconciliation Bill. Support enforcement of the Buy America program for national infrastructure projects. Support full funding in fiscal year 23 for the U.S. trade agencies charged with administering the U.S. unfair trade laws and customs enforcement. The caucus has always been in the forefront of development of legislation that addresses the importance to the industry, its workers, and the communities we serve. I know that our industry and association thank each of you on the caucus for your commitment and leadership on these issues. The industry has a great partnership with the caucus, and we applaud you for the work that you do. We need to keep the momentum behind these collective efforts and result in economic growth and security for the domestic pipe and tube and fittings industry, steel sector, and our nation's manufacturing sector. Thank you for your time today.
Mr. Froboda, thank you for that important testimony, and excuse my miscue. I appreciate you being here today. With that, I'd like to recognize Representative Lamb for questions.
Thank you. Mr. Conway, I wanted to start off with you. Welcome back. Great to see you again. I appreciate you highlighting in your testimony that the bipartisan infrastructure law will add 40 to 50 million tons of steel demand over the next 5 years. One of our goals in passing some of the strongest Buy American provisions that we've ever had was to advantage your members, not just to improve the company's bottom lines, which is also a goal, but to make sure the workers get their fair cut of that. In the last couple of years, obviously, we've seen an increase in strikes, labor unrest in Western Pennsylvania. We had a long and significant strike at ATI during the course of the pandemic, which affected a lot of the families. So, as we sort of monitor what the public is spending on this steel and how the industry responds, I was just wondering if you could comment on the state of labor relations presently as you see them, any particular challenges that your members are encountering. I know obviously the administration has made some changes at the Department of Labor that should hopefully help smooth things out, but just any comments you could make on that.
Yeah, I appreciate that opportunity, Connor. We're in negotiations right now with both Cleveland Cliffs and U.S. Steel, and so I left Pittsburgh in that bargaining. Those teams are continuing to work, and we have a deadline of September 1st. And as I mentioned, look, the industry's done well over the last couple of years, so And prices continue to do well because all the things that we've spoken about here. So there's no reason sane people ought to get in a fight when things are going pretty good. And I think we're going to be able to get to September 1st and get good, responsible agreements going forward. You know, it has been, people are struggling with jobs in the country, and there has been a number of strikes, and we've seen a few more not, you know, the one at ATI was certainly disturbing, and made no sense, frankly. You just got forced into it. But, you know, there is a sense that corporations are doing very well and people want a fair share of it. And so there's been an upswing in strikes, as there's been an upswing in resignations and people moving. And so there's a labor shortage, and that tends to bring those squabbles about. But at least here, I think we're going to be fine. Yeah, I think we're going to be fine. I don't.
Thank you.
wanna-
Yeah, and I just wanted to express that I think one of the frustrations many of us have had since the start of the pandemic, at least on the Democratic side, is, you know, when we spend a lot of the public's money in direct support of an industry, wanting to make sure that the industry recognizes, you know, that part of the deal for us, at least as a customer, the U.S. government, is that the workers are treated fairly and that a negotiation is held fairly. So it's good to hear that your expectations are positive on that regard, but just know that, you know, we have your back as this time goes forward. I have about a little over a minute left. Mr. Gonsalves, I just wanted to ask you, one of the things that I've worked on since I've been here has been legislation to create a strategic transformer reserve run by the Department of Energy. The goal being that it would have Buy America standards, and, you know, we would ensure that we always have what we need as far as transformers made here in the United States. Do you think a strategic transformer reserve would be beneficial, you know, not just economically, but for our national security?
Absolutely.
Do you think we could meet the need efficiently and at a fair cost using electrical steel like Cleveland Cliffs produces?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
We have been continuing to invest in expanding our capacity to produce electrical steels. We have just announced a small investment, small in dollar terms, $30 million investment in our Zanesville, Ohio facility to bring back a Senzimir mill to produce more electrical steels, and that will increase and free up Butler, PA, to produce more grain-oriented electrical steels for transformers.
That's great. Thank you. I don't think people realize, you know, how crucial that is when we talk about meeting our climate goals. We're going to have to design and rebuild a grid for the future that looks a little different than it does today, which means we're going to need a lot of electrical steel. And, you know, as you've highlighted so many times, and I didn't really appreciate until I visited your plant, the complexity of making it, and the electrical steel that's coming into this country from outside is, as far as I know, coming from countries that don't even make it. So, you know, the question of where it originates, you know, presents itself that way. So hopefully, you know, we can use the government's buying power for something like a strategic transformer reserve to at least help out as part of really an infrastructure type approach while we address the other issues. Thank you, Mr. Mervan. I yield back.
Yeah, Mr. Mervan and Mr. Lamb, just to complement, that little investment of $30 million will generate another 100 good-paying union jobs in our Zanesville, Ohio facility. So that's pretty much what you're talking about. So we don't see the unions as opponents. We see the unions as partners. We deal with them on a daily basis, and we work together well. And together we are 1 + 1 = 3, not 1 + 1 = 2. We don't divide, we sum up, we work together, and I believe that my friend Tom Conway has the same view.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to recognize Representative Crawford for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me start by directing my comments to Mr. Bear. I completely agree with your statement earlier. that we must keep the government out of the steel business. Citing China, for example, in 2005, China had the capacity to produce around 400 million tons of steel per year. Chinese steelmaking capacity is now around 1.2 billion tons per year. Much of this heavily subsidized, highly polluting capacity that should have exited the market a long time ago. The Chinese government is now exporting this subsidized capacity to third countries through their Belt and Road and other initiatives while claiming it's reducing excess capacity. This is an economic issue, an environmental issue, and a national security issue. And I'm glad to hear you believe that we are doing what we're doing as a caucus is making a difference. I just ask, what else do you think needs to be done to address government subsidies and other market distorting behavior in China and across the globe?
Yeah, thank you, Congressman. That's a great question. I think what I would say first is we need to continue to enforce the trade laws that we already have on the books and continue to strengthen them as well. And this means using them to enact measures before, when unfair trade is happening, but then also ideally before that injury is causing harm to our industry. In terms of strengthening those, there's still gaps in those trade laws. There's still reaches that they aren't able to make. I'll give you an example. If China were to subsidize production in another country, such as Vietnam, such as Indonesia, those current trade laws don't allow us to take action. Things like the Leveling the Playing Field Act would close some of those gaps. So we really strongly support and appreciate the work of this caucus to, as my comments said, to move that across the finish line. Lastly, then, I'd also say we need to continue to use the measures of national security that we already have, like Section 232, that allow us to make sure we have a strong, robust, resilient steel industry for America, to build our national defenses, to build our infrastructure, and to make sure that we're able to support the needs of the American people going forward. The American steel industry is ready to do that, is able to do that, and is making the investments to do it. And with the support of this caucus, we'll work together and get it done.
Appreciate that. Mr. Fruhoff, in January, U.S. Steel announced that it would double the size of its steel production in Osceola, Arkansas, which is in my district, by building a second mill with 2 new EAFs near its existing Big River Steel facility. When completed, this would create a mega mill with over 6 million tons of annual steelmaking capacity. Can you give me an update on that project and explain the significance of Big River Steel being recognized with Responsible Steel's first ever site certification in North America, which was also just announced in January?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Well, the project is well underway. We broke ground in February for the expansion of Big River. We're calling it BR2, but as you noted, between Big River Steel and the expanded facility, we'll be making over 6 million tons, and Mississippi County, Arkansas, will be the largest steelmaking county in the country once that mill comes online. So the project is well underway. It's on time, and we're looking forward to getting it up and running in 2024. Ground is being moved, steel is being put into the ground. I can tell you as well that the non-grain-oriented electrical steel line that we broke ground on last year is progressing very, very well, and that should come online in another 12 months to be producing electrical steels for the EVs, the motors needed for electric vehicles. So those are all progressing well. With respect to Responsible Steel, that's a global standard body focused on climate change. It has 12 principles, and Big River Steel was the first American mill to pass a rigorous external audit and be certified as a steelmaking site. So we're very excited about it. Responsible Steel has members across the steel supply chain, not just manufacturers, but big customers like Daimler and BMW and others. And by the way, Big River Steel received Daimler's Sustainable Global Supplier of the Year award last year, too. So it continues to shine. Thank you, sir.
Outstanding. Mr. Porter, in the time that I have left, my district has become the epicenter for EAF steel production. How are domestic EAF steel makers working towards a low-carbon future?
Well, just by the nature of what we do in electric arc furnaces, we're recycling metals that have coming out of the waste stream. So we're, instead of putting them back into the landfill, we're making them into new usable products. The other thing that's pretty significant for us now is the advent of technology and renewables as far as electricity. And as you all know, our electric arc furnace industry is powered by electricity. So with the growth of the wind energy sector as well as solar today, many of us are employing the use of that technology to power our electric arc furnaces. The other thing going on a little bit in terms of sustainability, and believe it or not, it's kind of a technology-based deal, is machine learning, artificial intelligence. Our mills are packed with technology. Most people are shocked by it when they come in to see the technology that's employed, but humans can think so fast, machines think a little bit faster. So as they tweak our processes, as we melt the steel and roll the steel, the machines are doing some behind-the-scenes calculations and refining the process for us, which energy is extracted from that. We make a cleaner steel, less emissions, things like that. So it's something we focus on every day at CMC, and I think the EAF industry as a whole, it is a major focus for us for the future.
Thank you. Yield back.
At this time, I'd like to recognize Congressman Boston for questions.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Fruhoff, one of the bipartisan priorities of the Congressional Steel Caucus is trade enforcement. Preventing unfair trade steel imports from China and elsewhere from undermining American steel making, and it's critical. Now, this International Trade Commission is currently reviewing several existing anti-dumping, countervailing duties cases against foreign steel. Why do you think that it is important to continue these cases at such an aggressive pace?
Well, first, thank you to you and to the other members of the caucus who have been strong supporters before the ITC, and thank you for that. The AD/CVD cases are an additional protection level for the industry against unfair trade. And we've talked a lot, the other witnesses have talked about China. We talk a lot about sort of circumvention and the overcapacity. So the ability to use the AD/CVD cases to stop these unfairly traded steel imports with additional tariffs and duties at the border is critical. It's not just the 232. You need the strong enforcement of the AD/CVD cases at the ITC and the ITA at Commerce, and we also need strong customs. So I know the committee has supported that in the past as well, making sure that Customs and Border Protection has the tools to enforce these. So we need all of these tools, and we need them to be strongly enforced and funded, and the administration to keep on top of it, because as others have said, these external imports, they're always looking for ways to circumvent the rules.
Yeah, just kind of going in that same direction. Several of the witnesses have brought up the fact that basically they hide or disguise where the steel comes from and then try to slip it through different ways. The Commerce Commission, do you think it is aggressive? We're giving them the money. Do you feel like they're being as aggressive as they need to be, or what can we do to make? We can pass all the laws in the world, but if the laws aren't being enforced, then what can we do to try to get these agencies to be more aggressive, and understand how important this is?
Well, I think certainly Congress has done its part. I would say continue to update, as Tom said, update the laws to give them new authorities. But, and I believe that the administration and the ITC, the ITA, and Customs are doing what they can, but they're outgunned. I mean, they're going up against an entire country, right, against the Chinese and other industries which have massive state resources behind them. They're always looking for ways to move steel to another country, kiss it, and then say it's Vietnamese steel or Indonesian steel, or to build facilities in these other countries. And so, it's a global game that's constantly moving. And so I think our administrative agencies need tools, and they need to be constantly looking at new ways of enforcement, sharing of information from the agencies and from industry. We provide information, and I think the cooperation between industry and the executive branch is critical.
Well, that's what we do as far as the countervailing and all of that, and trying to catch that. The other concern that I have is, what can your industry do, and what can you advise us to do to dealing with our? You got to realize that as much as a lot of people think that members of Congress stay around forever, there's a quick turnover. What do we need to do, and what can you do to educate new members of Congress as they're coming in, to explain to them how it is that U.S. steel made in the United States is the cleanest made, the best made, and then make sure they understand that it's not some evil industry. It is the industry that actually operates this nation. And so what can you do, and what can we do better to educate the new members of Congress as they come in?
Well, we're happy to have, and we have hosted, I think all of you are welcome at any of our facilities to learn. We've hosted your staffs. We've actually had CBP officers come to our facilities to learn about steel, to learn what to look for, to learn for, mill markings and the traceability paperwork you should be able to find for any coil, which is what we make, right? To help them understand the industry, to understand how steel moves through the system, so they can understand and look for false documentation, for looking for the telltale signs that this is a falsified certificate of origin. We're happy to educate any and all of you and come to any of our mills and learn what we do and how you can tell whether something is genuinely made in the U.S. and not.
Yeah. I appreciate that, and I'm very short on time, so I'll go ahead and yield back. Thank you.
At this time, I'd like to recognize Congressman Stauber.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and the Vice Chairs, for hosting this, and thanks to our witnesses. This has been a couple years since we've been together, and for those of you who don't know, I represent northeastern Minnesota, and it's the Iron Range, and it's extremely important to our nation, and it has been for many years, as Lorenzo and Mr. Fruhoff understands. One of the things that I really think is important, and it's been brought up a couple times, is the 232 tariffs. And Mr. Gonsalves, this is for you. The 232 tariffs are protection from the steel dumping and to ensure our industry stays vibrant. We have pushed this administration to keep them on the continuation from the last administration. Can you give us a snapshot of the devastation that would happen if those were to come off?
Well, I can tell you what happened because we had Section 232. First of all, Section 232 is not supposed to have a direct impact on trade, and it's related to national security. And the very first thing we need to understand is that iron ore and steel are the foundation of national security. We worked through the previous administration, and Congressman Kelly was one that was extremely important to get these things moving, as well as Senator Rob Portman of Ohio, Representative Kelly from Pennsylvania. So we're working very hard to have a Section 232 put on cores and laminations of transformers, because the cores and laminations were being cut in Mexico using Japanese, South Korean, and Chinese steel. We are giving away our ability to produce transformers. So the very first thing we need to do is educate members of Congress, because then when we talk with you, you understand what we're talking about. I'm very pleased to hear from Representative Lamb that he learned in his visit to our Butler facility what we're talking about. Anyway, we're able to move that painful Section 232 process through the administration. Commerce, after we pushed a lot, was able to put that thing on the desk of Mark Meadows, the former chief of staff, but that thing was never signed by the previous president. And the new president came and never signed either. So that's lack of knowledge. It's giving away the farm. It's very easy to talk. Let's buy America. We can buy America if we make in America. If we don't make in America, we'll just be talking. We will be talking, you will be talking, and nothing will get done. So we need to understand that when you are talking, we're not just talking. We're just trying to give you information for you to pass the laws, because your people, the people that elect you, know better, because they're suffering. They're the ones that are suffering. We're talking on their behalf. So when I say, let's reshore manufacturing, that's not because we are trying to create any type of protection. It's we would like to survive as a nation.
Lorenzo, I couldn't agree with you more. Thank you for the comments. Mr. Fruhoff, the recent announcement by U.S. Steel to invest in your mines on the Iron Range to enable production of DR-grade pellets continue to promote your commitment to ensuring steel is mined, melted, and made in America. What is the status of this project? what is needed to make it successful, and why is it important to the future of American steelmaking?
Well, thank you, sir. So the project, we are in the engineering phase. It's a $150 million float plant. That is a special line to create a direct reduced iron grade pellet. Requires additional beneficiation. So right now, we're engineering the project. We need permits, obviously, to get going on construction of the line. We're excited to get going on it. I think the line will allow us to take some of that 22 million tons of iron ore that we mine every year in the Mesabi and use some of it for these electric arc furnaces, which are now about 2/3 of steel production here in the United States. So we see that as critical to the long-term future of the Mesabi Iron Range, being able to make iron ore pellets both for the blast furnace fleet that we have, but also for our electric arc furnaces and for other electric arc furnace users. It's a critical input to electric arc furnace production.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gonsalves, real quick, strong trade laws that are strictly enforced have always been important to the steel industry. Can you address the importance of our anti-dumping, countervailing duty laws to the steel industry?
Yeah, we can't survive as an industry, as a vibrant, job-generating, national security type of industry, if we are not protected against people that are just dumping steel here in the United States, selling for variable cost, being completely subsidized to do that, and we just watch and believe that we're doing a great job because we are cutting prices marginally at the end user level. So it's extremely important that we understand that these things don't land in the United States because they are better or more competitive or they are technologically more advantaged, that they are just unfairly competing and destroying our society by stealing our jobs and moving them abroad.
Thank you very much, and I yield back, Mr. Chair.
This time, I'd like to recognize Mr. Kelly for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. I think the one thing we kind of lose sight of is your total economic footprint. All of you represent so many workers, but you also pick up something that people talk about as fringe benefits, which is a huge lift, right? So we help people with their health care, we help people to get ready for retirement, and so the health of the steel industry has always been critical. I think one of the things that I know from being in my life, and Mr. Gonsalves, you know, I live about a mile from Cleveland Cliffs. I grew up in Butler, Pennsylvania. It's about a half a mile from the dealership, and I got to tell you, visiting that facility, and Frank Godino puts on an incredible program on what grain-oriented electric steel is, and I really think it'd be good for more Americans to understand that when we talk about steel, we're just not talking about steel, we're talking about a whole variation of products that are out there. So whether it's the grain-oriented electric steel, which goes in our transformers, and you know, it's interesting, you have to explain to people when you're out driving, look at telephone poles. Every place you see a gray canister, understand that what's inside that canister is what makes it possible for us to have the flow of electricity. Okay. It's eye-opening for a lot of people. And then we talk about the non-oriented electric steel, because one of the businesses that we're seeing now explode is electric cars. And that product is very essential for that. So my whole point of being here today and listening to you, and I'm glad we were able to finally get back together. When we talk about our position globally, I don't want us to be a participant in that market. We don't need to participate, we need to dominate. We, for too long, have allowed other places to take part of our market right in front of us, and we've stood back and watched it happen. And then we sit back and say, wonder how that took place. Our ability to work with you on a daily basis, on a monthly basis, and looking at policy after policy after policy, and excuse me if I offend anybody who has never been actually in the workforce but has worked in government all their life, please, if you don't know anything about the policy, don't get involved in making something that's impossible for us to participate. So with that apology in mind, Mr. Gonsalves and all of you, could you just quickly, so people understand, the number of people that get a paycheck once a month, twice a month, whatever it is, get their health care, get their pension, just as the places that you represent I think it's incredible what we don't understand. And I think our role is to represent you and represent those workers and represent America. So I meant when I said, God dang, I don't want to participate. I want to dominate. And we need to put you in a position where you can actually do that. So, Mr. Fruhoff, I just start just real quickly because we're running out of time. I hate to do this to y'all. You come the whole way down here and you get 5 minutes to talk to us. That's not the way I'd run my business, but it's not my business.
Well, thank you, sir. Well, there's a study that was done, just to your point, a couple of years ago in Western Pennsylvania. I think U.S. Steel alone has a $3 to $4 billion impact beyond what we spend, right? So we spend a lot of money ourselves. This is the multiplier effect of the small businesses, the suppliers, the restaurants that are near the facilities that feed the workers, the workforce, the truck drivers who come and drop stuff off and take it away. Our pension plan is overfunded, we're happy to say, but we have lots of folks who are on pension who are retired, and they depend on us being able to pay those pensions. We have 3,000 workers alone in Pennsylvania. We are, I think, either the largest or maybe the second largest manufacturer in Western Pennsylvania today. I'm just giving that as an example. To your point, Congressman Mervan, U.S. Steel, Gary, we in Arcelor are now Cliffs. We are Northwest Indiana manufacturing. And again, there are lots of pensioners who depend on us being able to make sure those pension funds, the Steelworkers Pension Trust, are funded properly so that they can have the retirement they deserve. And the multiplier effect is huge. I think, manufacturing, people lose sight of that. Unlike some other industries, what we do ripples through the economy a lot more than some of the tech industries or the pharma industries. And so I think I'm glad people are talking about reshoring manufacturing. Like I said at the beginning, we never left. And hopefully some of the manufacturing sectors that did leave are coming back because manufacturing creates really good jobs for lots of people and really good retirements and health care and all the benefits you need.
Yeah, so if anything, and look, I don't think this country understands the immensity of this industry. Not all steel is created equally. We know that, okay? There's all kind of different products that get made. And I think that our not knowing the total impact of us not watching over this product and saying we've got to protect what we make here. We've got to make sure that people don't take from us what we started. I've got to tell you, and I know we're running out of time, so I'm going to apologize to you all for us not doing enough in the past to help you. When we know it's an unequal playing field and we sit back and we watch it, I think, Pete, you said it right. This is a 2-year deal for us, and it keeps turning. And, so the day you get elected, the next day you start your reelection. So we often concentrate too much on being reelected, Mr. Chairman, than we do about what our responsibility is. We are representatives. I know we call ourselves congressmen, but we are representatives, and we represent all of you. So listen, I want to thank you for being here today. I mean that sincerely. But man, I'll tell you what, there's a hell of a wake-up call out there today, and if we're not aware of it, or we have a blind eye or a deaf ear to what's happening, it's our own fault. Look at the man in the mirror. That's the problem. We need to get on top of all this. So thank you all for being here. Mr. Gonsalves, I want to thank you personally. You have kept Butler alive for many, many years. I've got 1,400 friends that work there. Their families benefit greatly. Mr. Conway, what you and I are able to do, we have raised the standard of living for millions of people because of what you all do and work together. So thanks so much. I'm sorry to go on, but I tell you what, we better get more passionate about what it is that we do. It's nice to have these meetings, but I don't want these 2 hours just to be 2 hours of pounding a desk and screaming. I want to make sure we're doing policy that makes sense for all of you. So thanks so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Representative Kelly, for bringing the passion and putting an exclamation point in bringing your community and the global perspective into it. Thank you. With that, I'd like to recognize Mr. Garamendi for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you for heading up the caucus. Very, very important. In 2009, as I left the Lieutenant Governor's office in California, a bridge was about to be built across the bay, the Oakland Bay Bridge. Got into a big fight with the state of California about whether it ought to be American steel. Turned out 10% cheaper to be Chinese steel. Ultimately, it was 10% more expensive because of the quality of the steel wasn't there. That started when I arrived in Congress in 2009, a Make It in America agenda. And together with Steny Hoyer, we've been driving that agenda every year, adding more and more requirements along the way, shipbuilding, Navy, on and on. This last year in the Infrastructure Jobs Act, which I must say only 16 of my Republican colleagues voted for, Senator Baldwin and Stabenow and I and Steny Hoyer added Make It, Buy It in America standards to every federal dollar spent, whether it is Department of Agriculture or Department of Transportation. So we continue to work on this. We appreciate all of your support. It would not have happened without the steel industry and other industries supporting strongly those provisions. Now, we got to make sure that it actually happens. And so your information that you're given today, together with watching closely, there are plenty of people that will try to get around the loopholes, including American contractors of every kind and stripe. So work with us, let us know. And as you've heard from my colleagues here, we're ready to go at it. It's not all good. Mr. Fruhoff, you once owned the Pittsburgh, California steel mill. Why did you shut it? So that it can be an Amazon warehouse?
Yes,
Tell
sir.
us how that works.
So one of the challenges of that facility, and I think you've kind of touched on it, is supplying steel to it. Right now, the steel that used to come to that facility came from Korea.
It did.
And the cost of, and we could go down a whole rabbit hole, if you will, talking about rail, but moving today, the situation with the rail industry, moving steel from the Midwest to California to have it further finished is cost prohibitive, if you can even move coils out there. Right now, the rail industry is so bottlenecked, it is virtually impossible to get reliable service from Gary out to Pittsburgh, California. So the alternative is, do you import steel from Korea to keep that facility running? And that was one of the challenges we had in trying to keep that a viable facility.
You and I need to have a further discussion. I understand it's a done deal and Amazon's going to have a lovely warehouse.
We're happy to talk to you, sir, about what the opportunities are to make that facility, that space, into something usable and productive for the region. It is a great facility. It's a great port location there in Pittsburgh. It's a deep water port that comes in pretty far inland through the bay system. So it is a great site. I think, as I said, one of the challenges was supplying the substrate to that facility from the Midwest.
It's interesting. All of the happy talk here isn't spread across the nation, nor is it spread to the steel workers that have lost their job in that plant. It's a pity you didn't talk to the representatives in the area so that we could have worked this out before you pulled the plug.
As I said, sir, we're happy to have a conversation with you. The challenge, again, though, is there is no substrate supply in that area.
It is, as you said, a deep water port.
It is.
Cheapest transportation systems in the world are on the water.
They are.
You know, I'm not buying your argument. It's a done deal. But I tell all of you that it's not a happy talk in every part of America. You build mills here, you expand them, yes. Oh, by the way, there's enormous opportunities in that area for hydrogen as a fuel.
We've had conversations with some of those folks looking at hydrogen in that area, sir. Absolutely. The permitting situation in Northern California is a challenge.
Permitting in California is easy if you have the right project. If you want to build a stadium for the Rams or the Oakland, you can get past it. It's about the politics. It's about how you move your project forward. I really want to thank all of you for your support in our continuing effort on Buy America, Make It in America. We're not going to drop that. There's more to be done. With that, I yield back.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to recognize Mr. Balderson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to think that I'm taking Mike Kelly to the Ohio State Notre Dame football game. He'll be cheering loud. Thank you all for being here this morning. Lorenzo, I feel like I can call you by your first name. You and I and Mike and Rob have had so many conversations in the last couple of years, and it's been a wonderful opportunity for me. You are definitely in my journal as one of the great Americans that I've had the opportunity to work with. So thank you for everything that you've done. And you know, you mentioned the $30 million that you've added into my hometown. That plant, like Mike's, is less than a mile away from my home. I've actually had two sets of parents come up to me in the last 3 weeks. One father was at Walmart as I was doing my weekend shopping while I was home, and thanked me. His son is staying in his hometown where he grew up, and he's going to work at Cleveland Cliffs. And the other one was a phone call. So thank you for the jobs that you've added there, and it's 100 jobs of good-paying jobs. Mike talked about the benefits, the health care. It's all good, and I thank you, and I thank Cleveland Cliffs for all your efforts and work that we put into that. We recently discussed the importance of Congress passing the CHIPS legislation and producing these semiconductor chips in the United States. Some of you may know that the Intel project is located in the 12th Congressional District that I represent in Licking County. So this is something that we've been working on hard for the last 7 months, actually a little bit longer than that. But can you explain to me why you believe this is such an important issue to the steel industry also?
First of all, thank you very much for all the good work with us, Representative Balderson. We would not be able to do things in the Zanesville area without your support, because your leadership in the area helps the community understand how things should go. And this is also something that members of the Steel Caucus can do more in terms of allow us to do our work, because sometimes they just don't know what's going on. And they are bombarded by the general press and things like that, trying to portray something that's extremely good as not being so good. I get this feeling as I moved into Indiana, and I don't feel like the people in Indiana really understand what they have there in terms of the competitive advantage for the world. The CHIPS Act is just that. It's our chance to bring these manufacturers here to the United States, creating American jobs with high, good-paying, middle-class wages, vast majority union jobs. What's a good thing, in my opinion? And creating the industry that comes around. That's exactly how this country did 100 years ago. And you have the chance to do again with the electrification of the fleet. And Cleveland Cliffs, because of our massive leadership in automotive, we are the biggest supplier of each one of these folks that are going from combustion engine vehicles to EVs. Each one of them. General Motors, we're the biggest. Ford, we are the biggest. Toyota, we're the biggest. Honda, we are the biggest. Each one of them. So we are working with each one of them to do that. You need your help, because we need these car manufacturers to produce here in the United States. They are learning a tough lesson. Bringing stuff, sophisticated, specified stuff from Europe is a bad idea. They don't have natural gas to heat their homes, let alone to produce steel. They will run out of water. We are at the Great Lakes, at the edge of 21% of the fresh water of the world. Congress needs to understand what we have. Then we have more Butlers, more Zanesvilles, more Northwest Indiana, more Clevelands, more Cincinnatis. That's what we need. We need to work together. We need to stop vilifying things. I hear people talk about electric arc furnace. Come on, half of my production, half of my plants have electric arc furnaces. The other half have blast furnaces. And the blast furnaces are there to stay. They are not polluting blast furnaces. They are not Chinese blast furnaces that use sinter and pollute like crazy. We have the highest level of pollution control in the world and the most efficient and environmentally friendly blast furnaces in the world. So let's stop this thing of talking down blast furnace. That's against the workers of the United States. Let's put abundantly clear. That's bad speech, and I will not take that anymore. But the CHIPS Act is just that, our ability to redo in the 21st century what this country taught the world in the 20th century. It's our chance again. Let's see if we'll put it to good use or if we're going to put it to waste.
Well, thank you for your input, and looks like we got a little movement going last night, so we will see. And as you said, and I want to be respectful, we've run over our time here a little bit, but you know, you brought up natural gas, and in the state of Ohio and West Virginia and Pennsylvania, we have about a 100-year supply of natural gas, and Germany's dealing with an issue right now dealing with that, and they also are going after the CHIPS Act of their own sign. So, Mr. Chairman, I apologize, and I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Congressmember. I'd like to recognize myself, Mr. Conway. Many members have talked, or many individuals who testified today talked about the level the playing field 2.0. If you could talk about that and update us and the vitality of that.
Look, I think it's been a long time coming. It's really an important piece of legislation for us. And, you know, it recognizes what we've been dealing with for, you know, decades. And there's been so much said here about it today, this battle that's going on. You know, Lorenzo puts it in really stark but good terms. We have an opportunity, and we have not updated our trade laws. We have sat back and watched the hemorrhage of our communities and our jobs and good-paying opportunities and people. And, you know, I was listening to Representative Kelly. Each one of these people that we're dealing with, they had companies before that got shut down and caught, and there are a bunch of retirees out there who, unfortunately, we call them orphans, and we struggle with trying to figure out how are we going to keep them going. And when you build a new company like we have here in some of these instances, who takes care of them? Whose responsibility is it? So without something like beginning to turn the corner, put level the playing field back in, you know, there is an opportunity here to really do something about trade and not just talk about it.
Thank you, Mr. Conway. And I agree with you. Growing up in Northwest Indiana, having those steel mills lose, families lost their pensions, and it was devastating to the community. It was devastating to Main Street and to the economy of all, and that's why we're here today. I also wanted to ask a question that came up, putting a 25% tariff on pig iron on Russia. I believe that you had mentioned that. If you can just address why that component would be an advantage to the United States steel industry.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, pre-conflict in the Ukraine, about 2/3 of the pig iron in the United States, consumed in the United States, came from Russia or the Ukraine. There's virtually no pig iron production today in the United States. There's a little bit for foundries, but the Russian industry uses pig iron and other metallics to subsidize Putin. I mean, these are oligarchs who own those facilities. So why we would allow pig iron or other metallics to come into the United States without the same types of tariffs that we're talking about for finished steel products or finished steel, we don't understand. And the President has the authority now, and we think he should use it to put a 25% tariff on pig iron and other metallics so that our industries can produce these products without being undercut by unfairly traded Russian imports, and of course, so that the oligarchs are not funding Putin's war machine.
Mr. Goncalves, Lorenzo, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, look, expanding on that, the massive production of pig iron in Russia that existed prior to the invasion of Ukraine continues. They are not shutting down because some countries, not all, some countries are not buying pig iron from Russia. That pig iron is going somewhere, and displacing local production, and this local production is coming to the United States. Long story short, the game of whack-a-mole with steel is now being replicated with pig iron from Russia. So, you know, we continue to look to the other side because we use pig iron. We produce our own pig iron. And when we account for emissions, they are all inside our plants because it's all Scope 1. It's our equipment. But when you import pig iron, or you buy pig iron from a third party, not necessarily even importing, that's a Scope 3. And Scope 3 is not accounted for. So we continue to play this beautiful game of calling emissions only Scope 1 and 2 and ignoring Scope 3 and pretending that everything is fine. It's not fine. And we're accounting for all these things because one day these things will be all clear and we are going to see the reality of things. So having the real picture, understanding the need to have a steel industry, understanding the reality, what's pollution, what's not pollution, what's global warming and not being global warming, helps a lot. Otherwise, we'll continue to talk the same stuff over and over again and nothing happens.
Mr. Ferboto, you had mentioned that this last quarter in 2022, that there was an increase of 40% of imports. What steps can the Steel Caucus do to try and assist in that?
Well, I think first and foremost, making sure that we have the available funds for a quarter and Custom and Border Patrol to make sure that they can do their jobs and keep track of all this product coming into the country. We talked a little bit about Mexico. Mexico is not living up to their agreement in the USMCA. This is something we've brought forth already to Commerce and the USTR's office, and obviously they've had some other things on their plate with Russia and with the China negotiations originally. But let's start at home and let's get our partners in the USMCA to live up to their agreements and live up to what the agreement said. And I mean I think those are two big things that we could stop the foreign imports from coming in. Otherwise, I think they're going to continue to rise. If it's like a child, they'll keep taking steps and steps and steps, and they'll keep taking chances until someone slaps their wrist. We just have to take a stand, and I think that'll temper their expectation moving forward.
Thank you. With that, that concludes this meeting. In closing, I just want to thank all of you for taking the time. And as we have all mentioned, understanding the vitality of the United States national security when it comes to the steel industry and the hundreds of thousands of jobs and families that you impact and the economic footprint. It is about national security, it's about economic opportunity, and it's about members of Congress, government, labor, and industry coming together to, if I could use Mr. Kelly's, not to participate, but to dominate. And what is on the other side of that domination is making sure that we have a future for our workers, for our workforce, and for an industry that has provided for families in my district for decades. It's faced challenges, and we have to have strong trade laws, and we have to work together to make sure that the resources are there to enforce those trade laws, and we have to make sure that we work together in a bipartisan effort, which we have done here in the Steel Caucus, to advance, to protect, and to make sure that we're thriving in the steel industry. With that, I thank you all very much for joining us today and look forward to working with you in the future. And again, I want to thank the staff for their endless hours of participation in making this happen. Jamie and all the other staff members and the USW for allowing us to put this together. Appreciate it, and thank you very much.